sitting in a restaurant without ordering so I wouldn't have to split the bill. Story: I, 27M, have been a part of a small friend group, around 8 people total, basically since college. For some background, 2 people from the group, Susan and Greg, are just absolute leeches. Going out for lunch, expect them to order the most expensive on the menu, then feed you some sob story about their finances, and then dumb half the bill on you. Last weekend, Dan, one of the people from the group, told me about a casual dinner. I told him how if Susan or Greg were there, I wouldn't be able to come. He tells me that they would be there, but I should just put my opinions aside and come just once. This is kind of where I might be in AH. I agreed with him and told him I would be there. I show up, and we all get to talking. Everyone began putting in their orders. Most of them spent about $40. There were only about 6 people there. When it gets to Susan and Greg, they both order expensive dishes, around $200. When it was my turn to order, everyone looked at me, but I just pick up the menu and point to the $4 Miller Lite and sent the waiter away. Dan asked why I hadn't ordered anything, and all I said was that I lost my appetite. The other 2 friends got up as well to cancel their orders and just have drinks. After the main courses came out, I saw Susan and Greg picking at their food. The waiter then brings over the check. Greg then grabs the waiter and asks him to split the check 6 ways. I stand up and correct him, saying the check was to be split 3 ways. Greg looks at me confused and asks why, since we always split the bill. I reminded him that 3 of us had not eaten any food, so we would just be paying for our drinks. So basically, at the end of the night, Dan, who probably only ate around $50 worth of food, was stuck with a $146.98 check at the end. Yes, I remember the exact number. I swear I saw his jaw drop when he picked that receipt up. I slid a $10 towards the check, said goodbye everyone, and walked out. The next morning, I found my phone full of texts from Greg and Susan telling me I was an AH for not ordering any food and forcing them to pay more than they had accounted for. I honestly laughed because the stakes alone were more than what they had paid, but to each their own right. I also got a lot of messages from Dan saying that I could have just not came instead of pulling that stunt and getting him stuck with an outrageous bill. He did it. At this restaurant, the bar is separate, so drinks are on a separate bill, if that makes sense. And if anyone is concerned about leaving a tip, I live in Australia. Edit 2. Hey, guys, just wanted to clarify some things. Point 1. 90% of restaurants where I live, they don't do separate checks and might separate the bill for you if you're lucky. By the way, this post is in AUD, so if you want the amount in USD, you have to convert it, too. Dan could have easily asked Greg and Susan to transfer him the money if he wanted, but he's always been about helping them through their financial hardship, even though they're just using him and keeps dragging me into it. I admit what I did was immature, but I'm tired of being forced to play along. It's his money, and if he wants to spend it on them, that's fine, but I'm not paying for them. 3. Also, Dan's a really good friend of mine, albeit blind as hell. I was just trying to get him to see what kind of people he was helping. I will admit it was a tad bit petty. 4. Thank you for the gold. Response 1. NTA. Is it not possible to ask the waiter for separate checks, i.e., everyone gets their own check for what they ordered ahead of time? While some people think this is a little tacky, it's not anywhere near as tacky as ordering a meal that costs 5 times as much as anyone else's and expecting them to cover it. Reply 1. It's not very common in Australia. It's just usually common courtesy to just order within what everyone else is ordering so you can split the check at the end. Most restaurants refuse as well, but I get your point. Reply 2. Just usually common courtesy to just order within what everyone else is ordering. These 2 people are repeatedly openly leeching off the rest of you. The solution here seems to be to stop inviting them out, or being friends with them. They've left common courtesy so far behind, it's a forgotten concept, and elevated, taking the PS to an entirely new level. Reply 3. Or order something that costs even more than what they ordered, if you can afford it, just to make a point. Hell, order 2 entrees and take 1 home. Reply 4. The other 2 that canceled their food orders 100% knew what he was doing and decided to follow suit. Strange that the leeches keep getting invited out at all. Reply 5. This right here. I understand wanting to be courteous to the waitstaff, but you are beyond that at this point. You have 2 people who are taking advantage. They're expecting to chip in $50 for a meal that's $200. That's not fair. OP. Next time the group goes out, take the lead. Ask your server when they first come over. For a separate bill for yourself, you don't have to speak for the table. If anyone gives you any pushback, tell them you're on a tight budget right now and want to stick to it by keeping your bill separate. Clearly, some of your other friends in the group feel similar, and it's their prerogative if they want to follow suit. Response 2. Even if you were actually not hungry, I would still say, not the a-hole. They clearly premeditated this whole event and expected others to take the financial fall for their lifestyle. Hope Dan opens his eyes, but right now, they seem super glued shut. Good for you, though. Reply 1. Yeah, they do this all the time. I guess I was feeling a little cheeky that night. Dan's a bit stubborn, but I wouldn't be surprised if he still thinks I was in the wrong and not them. Reply 2. Dan's an idiot. He should have just paid for his meal and let the other two figure it out. Dan has only himself to blame here. Reply 3. Exactly. Dan could have spoken up and said he wanted to pay his own bill and let Greg and Susan figure out theirs, but he actively chose not to. For what reason, I will never know. Reply 4. It's amazing that Dan is able to stand up to OP but not to Greg or Susan. Something else might be going on there. Reply 5. Dan's the one who heard your objections but told you to come anyway. You kept your opinions to yourself, at least at the dinner. You also kept your wallet to yourself, which apparently he's less pleased about, but too bad. It's clear that the other two friends have similar problems with the leechers. If Dan wants to be the leechers' enabler, then that's his choice, but he doesn't get to make you do that too. Suggest that you and the other two set up your own gatherings. Eventually, invite Dan if you want, and he's willing to cooperate. Response 3, NTA. I thought what you did was brilliant. You started by saying you would not attend if the leeches were there. Your friend Dan wanted you to come anyway, so you did, but on your own terms. The moment you ordered only a beer, that was a signal that every adult at the restaurant should have recognized, especially because the bar bill is separate from the food that you were not eating. Two others were not eating, thus obviously not splitting a bill for dinner. I bet Dan will not be so quick to include Susan and Greg again. Reply 1, NTA OP should just go out with the other two that just ordered drinks in the future. They clearly share OP's feelings on the matter and wouldn't be leeches. Reply 2, NTA, your approach was clever and fair. Susan and Greg's entitlement is the real issue here. Dan should have been more considerate of your feelings and the group's dynamic. Hopefully, this teaches them to be more responsible. Reply 3. Hilarious. How two other friends realized it and also backed out because they knew exactly what Greg and Susan were going to do. And Dan is once again the only person blind enough to not see it. Response 4. NTA. The next morning, I found my phone full of texts from Greg and Susan telling me I was an AH for not ordering any food and forcing them to pay more than they had accounted for. Dan was the one who told you to put your opinions aside and just come, right? Well handled. Your friends must have thought so too because they followed suit. Dan got caught out. What I'm wondering though is why any of you continue socializing / being friends with people who not only constantly leech off you but openly admit to doing so. Reply 1. I'm wondering why a group of adults is so incapable of communicating with one another. If I were put in that situation and I'd ordered food and the bill comes and they say just split it 6 ways, I would very bluntly say to the people who ordered expensive dishes, your food cost 3 times what mine did, so I'm only going to pay for the actual cost of what I ate. If that makes me an a-hole, then fine, I guess I won't be going out to eat with those friends anymore. But I feel like it just makes me an adult who expresses themselves. Reply 2, right? Use your words as we say to the little kids. Who puts up with this more than once or twice? Or at all? Don't hang out with at dollar holes. Reply 3. Yeah. I don't really understand how anyone would just quietly take that kind of BS from Greg and Susan. People who use you aren't your friends. Dan is a grown-up and can use his words and tell Greg and Susan he is not paying $146. Reply 4. I would just say it at the start. Since some of us tend to order more than others, we'll be splitting the check based on what you order and not evenly going forward. Reply 5. This also confuses the crap out of me. I would have politely refused the first time it happened unless someone asked me beforehand. Using your hopefully appropriate words to not be taken advantage of doesn't make you an a-hole. If your friends say it does, you need better friends. Response 5. I should just put my opinions aside and come just once. I could have just not came instead of pulling that stunt and getting him stuck with an outrageous bill. Dan needs to make up his mind, laugh out loud. What he means is, you should have come and paid for Susan and Greg's food, even though you were clear from the jump that you wouldn't. Not the a-hole, but time to stop hanging out with these people. Reply 1. Dan wanted him to go so the extra cost of paying for the freeloaders would be split among more people. Dan knew what was going to happen and wanted other people to help him shoulder the burden. It backfired, and now he is butthurt. Reply 2. TBH, if more people would have ordered more food and split it, his cut would have been around the same anyways, so I don't know why Daniel with the vans is complaining. Reply 3. Would have been about 30% less for Dan to pay if the 3 who didn't ordered something around $40 and they split the bills 6 ways. Dan paid $146, would have paid $100 if it went his way. Not to say the complaint is justified, but there is a money difference. Response 6, NTA. People saying, you stuck Dan with a big bill are probably just like these 2 users ordering outside of their means. I had friends that did this when I was in college, working 2 jobs, technically 3, just to scrape by. I was living on ramen, but they would insist I go out. I'd get a free glass of water and nothing else. I sometimes could have ordered the cheapest thing, but they always split the check for both food and drinks and tip. America, so asking to separate the checks is normal and done at many places here. So I just refused to partake. They complained after a couple times and I was like, hey, you all know I'm broke, so is it my company you're wanting or what little money I have? I no longer talk to any of them. If you go to the next outing, call them out. Ask if they have enough to fully cover what they're gonna order, and if not, to please order something else. Reply 1, I'll have the 24K gold tomahawk steak. Nice. Can you afford that though? You're paying for it yourself after all. I'll have the vegetable salad instead. Reply 2, had a roommate like that during my AIT after basic training. Food was free in the DFAC for soldiers, but she would always want to go out to eat at the restaurants on base, which wouldn't be a problem except she was dealing with some kind of problem with her bank that caused a freeze on her account. For the first several months on base, she had no money, but kept wanting to eat out. I didn't mind DFAC food and would rather eat for free. Reply 3, that's such a good way of finding out who to stay friends with. When I was in college, I was so broke and would do the same thing, go to hang out, but only get water and leave a few dollars I scraped together for a tip. The people I'm still buds with nearly 20 years later were the ones who would share with me the food they didn't feel like finishing and never made me feel bad for munch on saltine cracker and ketchup mini sandwiches. You know, because those things are commonly free. Reply 4. Oh, the ketchup sandwiches, laugh out loud, stares at my full pantry. If only I could tell 22-year-old me, wait till your 30s, you'll never have a grumbling, hungry stomach keeping you up all night again. Response 7, NTA. My only quibble with this is you could have ordered an Aussie beer instead of an American beer. Is a Cooper's not good enough for you? D. But I don't drink beer, so what the hell do I know? Reply to 1. Haha, this made me laugh. I just picked the cheapest one on the menu. Not sure why, since it was imported. Do love me a Cooper's, though. Reply 2, I totally agree. Not the a-hole for what you did with ordering food. I love it. But with all the delicious Aussie drinks available, kinda leaning AH for that drinks order, haha. Response 8, wait, Dan knows how these people are. Talked you into coming even though you didn't want to, and then got mad when he got stuck with the big tab? Is Dan an idiot? You are not the a-hole. Response 9, info. Why hasn't anyone tried telling Greg and Susan that they repeatedly order expensive meals and make everyone pay for it? Why not confront the freeloaders? How many times has this happened? Reply 1, this. That's exactly what I was thinking. I don't consider you a friend if I can't have open and honest communication with you. It sounds like everyone at that table felt the same way, yet no one had the courage to speak up. Without a doubt, everyone in my friend group would have looked at Susan and Greg and said, we love you too, but not today, sweethearts, and never again if you want to keep hanging with us. Reply 2, whoa, whoa, whoa. Are you suggesting speaking to someone who did something that bothered you? But that's not passive-aggressive or needlessly dramatic. Reply 3, right? In my friend group, if someone tried to pull that, we would all be like, what? F that. You guys ordered $200 meals, All I got was a beer. Maybe if our meals were comparable in cost, sure. And everyone would give that friend crap for being stupid, making it super clear they can't get away with that. Real friends aren't afraid to call you on your bullcrap, but also real friends wouldn't pull this whole situation either. Response 10, NTA. I had a coworker like that. If the company was picking up the tab, or if he knew it was a split-the-bill meal, he took full advantage, plus ensured he could take a doggy bag of at least half his food home. Once, he only ate the appetizers they ordered at a company lunch and took his whole meal home. I can't stand people like that. I did, however, have a friend group for a while where we took turns picking up the entire tab. No one took advantage of the situation, and if one person had significantly more than the others, that person chipped in. We even discussed who was picking up the tab before we sat down so it was clear. That was a good group. This Greg and Susan are not friends, never were. You used the word leeches accurately. And Dan is an enabler. He pushed you into going while knowing how Greg and Susan would act and how you felt about it. Dan is not a friend either. There are times in our lives when we have to leave friends behind. It's not always easy, but it needs to happen. I know I've had a hard time with that in my life. Not the a-hole. Reply 1. Oh, if the company is picking up the tab, fair game. Your company is not a friend, and it's a tax write-off for them. Go as wild as you can without your boss noticing/caring. Reply 2. Oh, totally, the coworker is spot on when it comes to getting the most from the employer, but it's a crappy way to treat friends. Not the a-hole, OP. Reply 3. When I had a $50 per diem, I used that $50 per diem. One employee did get in trouble for using it to buy groceries to take home, though. Response 11. NTA, I always ask for a separate check when I go out. I am not paying for your food. The fact that they admitted that they didn't intend to pay for their own food would make me never go out with them again. You did nothing wrong. I would send their text admitting that they didn't intend to pay for their own food to anyone who is complaining. Dan is the one who told you to suck it up and come for the evening. Reply 1. Exactly. Unless I'm treating someone, I always get my own check and pay my own bill. This will splitting of the bill thing is just so complicated and creates problems just like this. OP handled it beautifully. Response 12. Where on earth are you dining at in Australia where the mains are $200, but you can apparently get an imported beer for $4? Response 13. As an Australian, I have reason to believe this is fake. The tax on alcohol is stupidly high, and I don't think I've ever seen an alcoholic drink be $4, unless you're talking about a cheap and nasty shot which would be gone in seconds. We also don't say, check. Check? Any kind of those things aren't used unless you're talking about a list generally. Response 14. As an Australian, this feels fake, because point 1, I rarely encounter restaurants that don't allow split bills, point 2. I've never seen Miller Lite on a menu, point 3. I have never seen a beer sold at a restaurant for as little as $4. If such a thing exists, it's certainly not at a venue where the cost for 3 people's meals add up to $440. Response 15. NTA. You all know they are manipulating the situation to live an extravagant lifestyle on other people's dime. Just stop eating out with them so they learn to live within their means. Some people need a hard dose of reality. Response 16. NTA. I'd say you were clever and creative in finding a solution to the well-known leech problem. You didn't force anyone to do anything. They made their decisions and faced the consequences. If anything, Greg and Susan have only themselves to blame for ordering pricey dishes and expecting everyone else to foot their bill. Dan's reaction is somewhat understandable, but he knew the risks when he asked you to come. I think a lesson was learned that day, albeit a rather expensive one. Response 17. In Australia, orders a $4 Miller Lite, and the total is $146.98. None of that is Australian pal. Response 18. YTA. I can't help but call bullcrap on this whole story. Aside from the fact you seem to be friends with both the biggest leeches and biggest doormats on the planet, a restaurant where entrees range from $1.40 to $200, but has Miller Lite for $4, no place like that exists. Response 19. NTA. I'd respond to the text, "I'm sorry, I'm confused. Are you mad at me that you were responsible for paying for the food that you ordered for yourself?" How can you possibly expect others to pay for what you ate?